the subject of compliance. My name is Caroline Hill, and for those of you in the room that don't know me, my background is kind of a 360 experience of the industry thus far. I've been in hotels, I've worked for Cisco, and my healthcare career started with Roche. In the UK, I headed up the meetings and events, conference and events team there, and then moved to what was Universal, which is now metamorphosed into Ashfield Meetings and Events. 6 years ago, I set up my own company, Eventful Solutions, and then 3 years ago, in fact, at this meeting, EIBTM, we had our first initial discussion about the solution. Myself and a colleague from Roche, Mark Hamforth, we set up compliant venues, and we now have an online venue directory called Eventful Solution, called Healthcare Venues. So I've over 25 years experience in the industry, sometimes it feels like it, and I've also participated over the years in MPI as well, in various voluntary leadership roles. So please, one disclaimer, the things that I'm going to talk about are really my personal opinions and that of our organisation, and not of any formal regulators or authority. So before we start, and for those of you in the room who may not be familiar with compliance and this sector and information, why do we have regulatory codes? What do you understand by compliance? Everyone talks about it, adds it into conversation, but what do you understand by it? Anybody want to offer an opinion? Yeah. I mean, regulatory codes and compliance have been around for several years. It's nothing new, but in essence, what we've done is we've put together our own interpretation of what they actually mean, and fundamentally, they're to guide and help the interaction and relationship between healthcare professionals and the healthcare organisations, freeing any perception of inappropriate behaviour, thus leaving the general public to be confident that their choices regarding medicines are made on the merits of each product and the needs of each patient. So this means that the provision of honoraria, gifts, hospitality, meetings and events, etc., don't unduly influence the healthcare professional when it comes to prescribing, which I think is, fairly straightforward. So, in fact, that red cross shouldn't be there yet. So behind that red cross is lots of headlines that happen, that appear in the newspapers. It's always the headline that hits the news in terms of things that are wrongdoing, whether it be, the bribery scandals that have been of recent years, doctors being taken out on extravagant events or lunches. This, has happened over recent years, and the regulators want to avoid this and restore the public perception that, going back to the previous slide, is that, healthcare professionals are not unduly being, they're prescribing on the merits of the product and not unduly being influenced by the healthcare organisations. So how does this affect meetings and events, you ask? So up to now, the regulatory codes have impacted meetings and events in various different ways. And here I've just done a very brief overview. I've picked a couple of different countries, including the US, Asia and Europe, with France and Germany. And when you actually look at, how they interpret into their own guidelines about perception and impression, you'll see there that France just say it should be appropriate, Germany say it should be appropriate, the US use professional, and in Australia it should be an appropriate balance between the duration of educational content and hospitality provided. When it comes to accommodation, again, slightly different interpretations in terms of, in Germany, needing necessary accommodation, whereas in the US they can only provide accommodation to HCP faculty. And then Australia, reasonable accommodation expenses. So can you see the type of language that's coming out? It's all around perception and interpretation. And again, I've looked at here, in terms of venues. I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of this. Each code is different. Each code lays down its own regulation and guidelines. Likewise with travel, subsistence, and there are some commonalities between codes, and then on others there are very big differentials. Likewise on sponsorship. So that's how the land of the lie, lies today. So if, for example, you had a company based in Switzerland organising an international meeting in Spain for a group of international delegates, which codes would apply? Anything else? Yeah. Basically, the Swiss code would apply because obviously of where it's being held. The Swiss would apply because the company is Swiss. The Spanish code would apply because the meeting's taking place in Spain, and then the country code for each delegate. But obviously, it is the strictest that applies, and this causes quite a complexity and challenge to planners and organisers when they're arranging meetings. So let's see how this looks in context. Your favourite aunt has been unfortunately diagnosed with a rare form of blood cancer. The diagnosis is not positive, but the condition can be treated. So which would you prefer? Would you prefer the doctor with the stethoscope around his neck, or would you prefer the doctor with champagne and maybe a suntan from a meeting that he's attended in Mexico? So again, a little irony and comedy there, but really just to try and help you understand, where the key drivers should be and where they should come from. So again, if you were to, help your aunt go to a doctor in that specific therapy, you find out that the doctor works with several drug companies. So again, that might just highlight and flag, okay, well, is he giving completely unbiased opinion? The doctor prescribes the latest drug costing €50,000, and you know that the doctor is receiving or has received payments from the specific drug company of maybe the drug that they're going to prescribe. But upon further investigation, you find out that the payments were actually for research. So again, does that not put it back into context that was pretty valid maybe for what they were receiving the payments for? And then there's maybe a headline or some other information that you become familiar with in terms of the doctor playing golf with the drug company rep. But maybe what you don't know is that they were playing in a charity match and the doctor actually paid for themselves. So again, it's all about perception and context. And this can be difficult to articulate and to manage at the same time. So what happens next? So this session isn't going to take you through the background of what the here and now is. But what we're going to look at is, what's new on the horizon, what's important to be aware of today. Well, many of you in the room will know that transparency reporting is here, and it's here to stay. It's the reality of today's day-to-day operations. The latest guidelines to be introduced to the regulatory codes of conduct across many countries are now around transparency, disclosure or reporting. What this means is that the capture of healthcare professional spend and the declaration of the relationships between healthcare professionals and organisations needs to now be reported. It hit the headlines, if you like, in 2010 with the US Sunshine Act, which is actually now known as Open Payments, and has recently followed with the introduction of the FPA, Transparency Disclosure Code, FPA being the European Federation for Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. So this is meaning now that all healthcare organisations will have to capture their spend on healthcare professionals in 2015 and publicly report that in 2016. Many countries have already been doing this. So when you look at the UK, Netherlands and France, they've already integrated this into their local codes. This is the FPR rulings. So what does this mean? So this means that companies will report, as some are already doing, these are actual snapshots off of the various different websites, of aggregated spend on healthcare professionals. And in the meetings and events environment, that's broken down by, as you can see, registration fees, travel costs, etc. Or maybe just an overview, a high-level touch reporting. This is going to move to line item reporting, and that's where the challenge lies, the fun starts. Some organisations are ready and able to go and hit the ground running. Some, unfortunately, are not, which is quite surprising. I know organisations that have been working on this for the last 4 years, others that are, okay, it's here, it's now, let's do it manually maybe to start off with, and we'll perhaps integrate a new solution as we become more familiar with it. It's a little bit like, if you commit to something, you'll actually do it. If you then get told you have to do it, you then really do have to do it. And I think this is the situation that's happening now across organisations. And just for a sense point in the room, how do you feel this is going? What's your feel? What's your experience? I like that. A little bit like this. Come see, come ça. Yeah. Oh, a down. They don't really know. They're just about getting there. Yeah. Okay. That's quite surprising when you feel, you know that it's been on the horizon for the last couple of years. This is not something that's just been, launched and people have said, let's get it. We now have to do this. People have been given notice. So it's going to be an interesting situation as we move forward. As we saw at our recent healthcare meetings forum in Singapore, which we held in August, obviously the US have led with this, with open payments. We can now see the implementation within Europe. But on our visit to Singapore, we can now see that this is actually spreading eastwards. The healthcare professionals over there, the medical societies over there, they are looking to see how the US and the Europeans have, introduced this and how they're implementing it. And we've seen some international organisations be very good at this, but they're trying to, like anything, like an SMMP program, they're trying to implement this on a global footing, and obviously coming up against challenges when it goes regional. If they're trying to implement, let's say, global hospitality policies, limits, they find themselves, against a challenge when they come to the local level. So the US and Europe have led the way, and Asia and other markets are now looking to move in line with this and assess what it means to them. So this gives you an idea, and I've taken again just life sciences and pharmaceuticals rather than other segments of the sector, to look at the various codes which are now having this integrated into their regulations. The other challenge is that it's complex, as well as it being complex to implement, it's complex to communicate. It's not black and white. And the important thing to realise is it's not necessarily just the regulatory guidelines and codes, it's how each organisation implements it. And that can be very different. And I think this is sometimes one of the challenges that suppliers face. They want a black and white solution. They just want to know, I want to understand the healthcare sector. So do we, sometimes those of us that are in it. But you have to understand how each of your clients is interpreting this and implementing this. So it's about asking the relevant questions of your clients to find out how they're interpreting this and implementing this on a day-to-day basis. And they find it, they maybe understand the regulatory codes and guidance. They implement their own policies and processes and procedures and get the relevant education internally. That in itself is, a big ask. but then they have to disseminate that down to their supply chain. So, venues, DMCs, the technology providers, agencies, and ultimately, the associations and delegates, they have to understand it. Again, if you can imagine a delegate attending a meeting, again, they might understand the regulations, but depending on who, they're maybe interfacing with at a healthcare organisation perspective, it might be different. So they have to understand it from the different perspectives of the healthcare organisations. So you can understand this complexity that's now within our sector. And there's a new actor on the M&E stage. So we're all very familiar with stakeholder management, whether that be the budget holder, procurement, the supply chain, or the internal meeting planner or the agency channel. But now the other new player on the block is the compliance manager. And previously, come back. So I was going to say, previously that person was unknown, or you didn't really have much contact with that person. Now that person is front stage and central. They're involved in nearly all decision making. If you need advice, they're the go-to person at the moment. There's so much uncertainty around some of these guidelines and regulations that your compliance manager in a corporate organisation is now your best friend. They're overtaking procurement and finance. They're now the people that are leading the way and helping you navigate through this new landscape. And I think another sort of new thing that we're seeing is, applying compliance, to each situation, each different, cost item. I said before, it's not black and white. There's a certain subtlety. There's a new language that's coming out that we're using. There's new processes and policies that we're needing to become familiar with. So, this is bringing along new skills, a new level of training that's needed. Again, through that supply chain that we've seen, but also internally through corporate organisations. The corporates are expecting this. Medical societies are needing this. And agencies are effectively selling this expertise, so it has to be there. And in order to train those people, there's no second chance, with compliance. You need to get it right first time. So it's just, so high on the agenda now within organisations that they understand it internally, and then they need to cascade that information down to their supply chain. Things that we don't know is the impact on healthcare professionals. With transparency reporting, in some instances, they have the option to opt out. So if, for example, you're inviting a healthcare professional to an event, and you articulate to them the data that you're going to capture on them. So let's say, you're going to say, right, you're going to report on the meeting, the dinner, for example. They can choose to opt out of that. They're not going to either, attend the dinner. They might even offer to pay themselves. Can you imagine the complexity now around just pure logistics, which used to be quite simple? They can now opt out. They're making, decisions about how you interact with them. These, it's going to affect how, meetings are designed. You're not necessarily going to know. You might, build a meeting for, say, 200 people, and you put on a dinner for 200, and 50 then opt out. What do you do then? So you've got to get those processes in place that help you manage that and manage that effectively. Will they now choose to get more of their information through online technologies rather than face-to-face meetings? How will this look? And we're still learning as to how this looks, let alone, some healthcare professionals. I think there was a survey a couple of years ago, but maybe 18 months ago in the US, whereby they sent out a survey to healthcare professionals asking them if they knew about open payments. And I think 97% came back saying they hadn't heard of it. This is impacting them. This is going to appear potentially on, a website where you go to your doctor, you can see that interaction and what's been spent on them. They don't know what that's going to, do to their patients, and this is causing concern. And, until it starts, becoming high in the public eye, that's when things are going to, people are going to be saying, well, what do we do? How do we operate in this situation? It will only be almost after the horse has bolted that things will start, disseminating down, and we'll be in a new phase of operation. The other thing is the expert patient. Does everybody know that expression, the expert patient? So the expert patient is, if you like, us. It's the informed patient. So, everyone who's going to the doctor, and we probably all do it, we go onto Google. Dr. Google, is the new, environment where we go and check out what's wrong with us. We go and check out, what treatments are available. We're going into our physicians and our doctors and almost telling them what we should be getting. We're the informed expert patient. So how much is that going to impact on the patient, and, really interrogating the healthcare professional in terms of, what meetings they've been to, what CME they've had, what's been spent on them by a particular company, and how that's affecting their prescribing habits. Where did you get your suntan? Have you been on holiday, or have you been away at a congress? These are the questions that are going to be asked. So we don't know how that's going to, change the way things move in the future. Because at the moment, the expert patient isn't probably aware that this is disclosed information. They soon will be when it becomes live. And then what does the global picture mean? The US have just gone live in 2014, I think it was in June 2014, with data under open payments. There is a huge backlash, happening over there with, questions on everything, doctors saying, well, I didn't go to that meeting, I didn't have that cup of coffee, that's actually not me. I don't know whether you know, but under open payments, they're now categorising the doctor using their middle name, their doctor number. There is still an element of not getting this right. So, how will this look when, we kind of come out of how the US is reporting to then how FPA is reporting, and then as we move into this whole global picture, we still don't have these answers. So we need to be aware of things that happen moving forward. And again, that changing landscape that we're in today could even change further. We don't know what that will look like. So how will transparency evolve? Is it going to get down to, and I used it, ironically, in terms of, that cup of coffee, the shape of meetings is going to change. It's almost like you want to have a tag on a doctor, the badge tags, they're going to have that to see where they move, what meals they take, it's all very well now. We use that to sort of say what session you're in. It's going to go down to, what meals they're taking, what they're actually doing, what events they're attending within an event. So how will that transparency evolve? And what are the consequences? The consequences are high, like anything, if you get this wrong. One of the things we are seeing is that GSK are actually now, and I've heard from other companies, they're actually bringing doctors in-house, employing doctors to provide education. And because they're paid employees, they don't have to report under that. So there's ways around this that organisations are going to look at. There is going to be potentially a reduction in event investment. That people are going to scrutinise what events are viable to hold. Where are doctors, going to gain this education that they need, and look at alternatives. So it's important that you all understand compliance, and that we integrate that into our whole event supply chain, because it's here, it's now, and we have no choice about it. And I think the future is other sectors are doing this, you know. I think we're leading and charging the way through this minefield. You know, we know since 2008, you know, the financial guidelines around banking, you know, have all been in the press. You know, they have this already. We can see this going into other organisations and other sectors. So again, if you're working with the healthcare industry at the moment and you think that's bad, wait until it hits other sectors that you're working with. And this is just an example of the Dutch bankers. And again, I just want to make this more of an open discussion, not just a presentation. So if you want to carry on the learning, EIBTM are one of the sponsors at the next European Healthcare Meetings Forum, which is happening in December. And the key focus of that is around, again, the expert patient, identifying their role, you know, and discovering how this new dynamic is going to work and how it's going to have an impact on the educational needs of the HCP, and also what this means to the future format of meetings and events. We are currently running a survey, believe it's the first survey of healthcare professionals themselves, to find out what their views are around meetings, and how they think that the medical meeting environment is going to change. And you can see just two of the results so far, that, you know, they believe that they don't know what this new landscape is going to mean to them. You know, they feel that they haven't necessarily been informed correctly and appropriately, and also they believe that they're going to get, and this is, you know, again, how do you interpret this? 75% believe that they will gain 80% of their medical information needs online by 2017. You know, so the meetings, Healthcare Meetings Forum in December is going to talk about this in more detail and discuss what that actually means moving forward. So that's enough from me. I just wanted to open it up to the audience to see, you know, tell me, how does this resonate? Is it new information? What types of experiences do you have in your current worlds?
Not ready yet.
Not really?
Not really yet ready. Because of my clients at the moment, they
Are you an agency? Okay.
Working with a couple of pharmaceutical clients, and all of them are
not ready. Wow.
Investigating, doing a lot manually. So I have a few questions.
Of course. Yeah.
Maybe you have some ideas.
And please, I'm not necessarily the only expert in the room, so please feel free to contribute.
Which tools work for tracking and reporting spend?
Excel. And I, you know, joking all apart, there are companies using Excel.
My clients are doing that.
Okay, there you go. You know, I know organisations that have been looking at this for 4 years that are trying to integrate this into their current event management software. There are other organisations implementing it into their compliance software that already exists, and there are compliance specialists out there. You know, again, if you're from a healthcare organisation, you know, you've heard of NIA, you've heard of Zinc. You know, we've been using those systems, you know, for a long time for, you know, job bagging on promotional materials, etc. They are now looking at solutions that can help, you know, for transparency reporting around meetings and events, and others are implementing their standalone, you know, customised solutions that then maybe integrate with one or more of those other existing platforms. So, you know, I think it's different for every single client. You know, there's, you know, if you like, in hindsight, maybe what they should have done 4 or 5 years ago when this all came out, said, right, let's get together, let's look at this strategically, let's look at how we can come up against a solution. You know, but again, everyone's worried about competitive advantage. Let's look at how we can do this ourselves. And, you know, everyone's just gone off at you know, their own tangents within their own Okay. I'm not sure how I can stop that. I need to. Right. This. It will come up with another pop-up in a minute, possibly. And you'll laugh because this comes up every hour at home. Maybe it won't. So I think, it's about you interrogating your client as to how are they doing it, and also as an agency, how you can help them, without obviously sharing too much, sensitive information from other clients. If it's, non-sensitive and non-commercially advantageous, look at what you're doing as an agency to help your other clients and look at bringing that across in terms of best in class.
What's important is flexibility, because in an agency, whichever company you're reporting to wants it in a different format and different groupings and different information. So you need to have it as flexible as possible, but you can then bring it into how they want to have it submitted.
I think we're going with the thing that you have to
do everything. Yeah.
And then you've got.
Then you're not caught out. If you capture everything, then you won't absolutely
It's a lot of
manual.
work, leaving room for error, and it's not very structured. So I'm scared because I think that a lot of Excel sheets it's a mess waiting to happen.
And to be honest, it's changing daily. So what a client wants today could change by the end of that event. So, you could look at it, and say, right, okay, operationally, this is how we're going to manage this event, and halfway through it changes. And you've got to be ready and adaptable to manage that change. Yes, I mean, yes. If you liken it to registration in a way, in terms of capturing all of that information and the mistakes that can happen and the nuances around that, this is going to happen again. And it's even more crucial because this is being reported financially and publicly.
What about the privacy of the HCPs? Can they opt out of this, and where?
They can, and it differs, I think, from country to country. And I will hold my hands up that I don't know the ins and outs of it. But yeah, I mean, and this is what's going to drive the challenge, if you like, because like I said before, and I know it just from a dinner perspective, they could potentially say, I'm not going to have dinner, because they don't want that reported. They may be happy for their travel, their attendance at the event to be reported, but they don't want their subsistence reported, because again, their subsistence expectations may not be in line with what the company are offering.
There's also some lack of clarity around whether you need to report on dinner spend.
Yeah.
Some countries you have to,
Yep.
whereas FPA on their template document, they don't suggest that you track that. Some countries you have to track that.
And again, some...
Certain delegates opt out because they know their
Exactly,
spend is
yeah.
going to be reported on, but certain countries it's not reported on and it's not part.
Yeah, some companies have already set limits, some haven't. FPA have a guidance, but again, that's not necessarily appropriate, for certain countries or in certain destinations. That's the other challenge you get, where, the limit that they've set, you're not going to be able to get a meal, certainly not an evening meal. You might get breakfast, but you won't get an evening meal for that. So, these are things that are still evolving and still being worked out. Did you have any other questions? Go on, keep going. Oh, share the experience in the room.
I was wondering, would it also have an effect on the number of no-shows? Because I think we have seen a lot of no-shows over the last couple of years, which are actually sometimes a little bit ridiculous. But once it's reported, it might turn the number of no-shows down a lot.
Again, yes and no. And again, this is where even in the US with open payments, there's still a question mark over how this should be reported. And there are certain elements that are reported as kind of unidentified spend or unallocated spend. But again, that's not then broken down across the number of delegates. So again, it's all very well putting into place, a policy and a process for this, but it's been put into place by people that don't understand our business and our industry, so they're not looking at the ramifications per se. And I think this will come out with, legal challenges, with a lot more questioning over once the reporting goes live, because, yes, it's reporting, but if it doesn't mean anything or it can't be translated, then it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on. But of course, we're all having to, go through this process of managing it and reporting it. But I think, the most important pivotal part will be after it goes public and the challenges that, are taken on the data, that people will start going, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, or actually we need to do this a different way. That's when, those sorts of questions, I think, will become more highlighted. Go on, go for it.
No, it's an idea that I have, and I'm asking myself, is the pharmaceutical industry imposing too much on their suppliers at the moment? Because they're basically asking me, and I'm talking to my
Yeah, absolutely.
they're asking us for a lot, and they're also asking us to bill, for instance, hotel bills are not usually the easiest ones to process, but they want them all processed in FPR-related, non-FPR-related line items. It's a lot of work. They're not really willing to pay us extra for all of those extra work.
But if you like, this is about the sort of the cascade. And again, looking in hindsight, there was never a focus group or, a gathering of all the relevant parties that were going to be impacted by this to say, how best can we come up with the right solution that works for us all? So what's happened is, the regulators have come in, with the policy, if you like, and then it's disseminated down to the corporates. The corporates are going, right, how can we handle it? Then that's disseminating down to, the next level, which I call kind of the agency level. And then you've got the venue and the supplier level. So you can imagine venues, if you like, they don't even have necessarily this broad overview understanding. So they're getting asked all of this from maybe one client, 2 clients, 3 clients, and then looking at it and going, what can we do? Because what they'll potentially need to do is actually look at their financial platforms to say, we need to handle this different, and we then need to start offering it in this way, And there's some that are just saying, this is how we do it, take it or leave it. We're not going to, because, they see the issue with, this is costing us money. This is going to impact our bottom line in the same way it's going to do with yours. Are you going back to your clients and saying, this is now costing me an extra person, an extra day's work, and saying you'll have to pay for this? Yes? And is that, being accepted by your clients because they have no choice? No. So it's an expectation that you will integrate this into your service offering. Is that fair? No. But if it's the only way that they will work with you, then you have to accept it. So, it's kind of hitting us all at every single different level. And it's how we try and collectively manage it effectively to go back and say, well, actually, this is how we'd like to, work with you. And it becomes more of an integral business partnership to say, how can we best provide a solution that works for you, Mr. A client, Mr. B client, Mr. C client. And I think that's it's going to take that brave person to kind of say, right, this is what we need to do, and stand above the parapet rather than just accepting what the clients are requesting and going with it. Because actually what you're doing is you're becoming an octopus.
I have to say from our experience, our clients understand that it's a lot more work and they are happy for us to charge for it at the time. I think it is about matching that.
Some of our clients, they don't have any hard time about it. But also I look at the hotels, for instance, the things that we have plenty of. Quite a lot of things that work for them, and we're not paying them extra.
Mm-hmm.
They don't do it, the agency ends up doing it.
Yeah.
If they don't do it, they'll have to do it.
But again, it's finding out up front whether they're going to do it or not, rather than, after the event.
Most of our knowledge has come self-taught from bad experience or what our client is telling us before we know, which I hate. Where would you say is the best place to keep up? Because, you can trial Google all you want and you'll come up with 10 different answers. So how do you think it's best to keep ahead of where the industry's going?
So I think there's industry education out there. There's various different, educators, if you like. The regulators themselves, in terms of them offering guidance, and then actually coming up with that solution, like I said, with your client to say, right, let us both look at this, talking to compliance managers, how are we going to come up with this solution? Because I don't think there is a Bible or a black and white solution. So in a way, we have to come up with an interpretation that makes sense for all of the various parties involved to manage the process. I think there's lots of things in the offing that will potentially help that down the line. There's nothing necessarily today, but because we've seen that gap, we know what needs to come, and it will come in time, but it will take, unfortunately, a little bit of time.
I think the problem is when you're dealing with a company such as Roche, for
Yep.
instance,
Yep.
they have their huge compliance department, but at the same time, as an agency, we are trying to give the impression that we are informed
The experts.
and that we know as much as or more than you. So it's very difficult for us to say, can we work with your compliance team to keep ourselves educated, because it makes us look as though...
I don't think so. Personally, I don't think so, because it's all very well you having the industry knowledge, but you don't necessarily have the knowledge of how that company applies it.
No, absolutely, and everyone is slightly different.
Yeah.
But you do expose yourself slightly by having those conversations with your client, I feel, anyway.
What does everyone else think?
I don't have any problem with it.
Yeah.
I deal with all the compliance officers around the world.
Yeah.
They're these company specific.
Yeah.
And even within the company, sometimes I send a request, is venue approved? On Monday it's yes, on Tuesday it's no.
Yeah.
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 You never know exactly who's entering your ring, or it depends on the tour. It's a blurred line.
And
So I think it's very important.
personally, there are certain solutions out there where you can get compliance support, and certainly we're working with a lot of agencies to provide that. But I think it's having that open, and even before transparency reporting came along, when I worked in agencies, I would go and have that honest, open conversation, not necessarily exposing yourself, but just wanting to understand how they apply it across, all different elements of compliance. And then building that in, or incorporating that into your own internal training. Because, and again, they will have that expectation that they won't be the same as your next client, and you need to understand it as they deliver it. And I think they would, and again, I'm talking from my own personal experience here, I would respect an agency that did that, because they're trying to understand my environment and my landscape versus applying what they've maybe learned from other clients onto me, and then coming up against a buffer when it doesn't work. So I think there are ways that you can do it without necessarily exposing yourself, but get comfortable in your own environment within the agency that you understand as much as you can that's out there, and then apply it to your own individual client requirements, for sure. Even when I worked in an organisation, we literally had to go to our compliance manager each time to get something signed off, because it would. And this is what we say to our venues, even though the company name is Compliant Venues, our venues are not compliant venues. They become healthcare-enabled venues. And the reason is because, there is no tick box that says it will be that for that, that for that. It's unique to every single meeting, delegate type, meeting type, etc., etc. And that's what makes this, this sector so complex to work within, but also, challenging and different for other reasons. So yeah, that's what I would suggest in that one. So when you say your clients aren't necessarily ready, are they looking to you to have all the solutions, or are they happy to work with you to come up with the solutions, or haven't you yet got to that conversation? It varies.
And they are very open. They're asking us, what is your opinion, and how do your other clients work? What is the hallelujah moment? Some of them say, you wait and you see, and we'll come up with a solution, and you'll have to deal with that. But I haven't seen it yet.
And
you were saying before that you've seen companies that are ready. I'm very curious people, of course.
Are you finding that there are particular markets that are better than others? So even within maybe a global organisation, are you finding other, markets that are more advanced, more ready for this than others?
Certainly
Big pharma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Ignore it.
Yeah.
Ignore it. They might go away.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I agree with that. Would everyone else agree with that? And certainly the international organisations that are looking at this, maybe as part of their whole meeting programme, and looking at across continent, they're the ones that are kind of charging the way. But like you say, dependent on the culture and structure of an organisation, there might still be pockets of the organisation that get overlooked and that are not necessarily up to speed. But that happens, to be fair, across the organisational structure, irrespective of transparency or regulation or regulatory code. And we all know the markets that, even when you're implementing new solutions across multiple markets, there will always be certain markets, remaining nameless, but two certainly that spring to mind in Europe, that will always be the ones where it will be different, and they will want a unique solution, their own country solution versus the global solution, for lots of different, sometimes relevant reasons, others more cultural and structural. What are people seeing in terms of meeting design? So, are meetings becoming shorter? Are they remaining more national? What are you feeling currently that's happening? Possibly due to this, possibly due to other reasons. You haven't seen a difference? That's interesting.
Not in Europe, anyway.
Okay.
Maybe there.
I think we saw a big dip in US meetings.
Yep.
I think it was while everyone was a little bit scared.
Yeah.
Didn't really know what was going to happen.
So they held back.
Now in the last 3-4 months, we've seen it rise back up again. So I'm not sure if that was the reason or whether it's the recession reason, but there was a very big dip in US meetings, which seems to coincide quite well.
And what about organisations saying that they won't sponsor HCPs to meetings? You're experiencing that? I mean, I think one of the UCAMED, the medical device regulator, they've actually said that they can foresee healthcare professionals not being sponsored to Congress by 2018. Yeah. And I think, overall, we're seeing, if you like, the more collaborative approach between corporate organisations, medcoms agencies, event agencies, and the supply chain, because of the impact across the board. I think the healthcare forum that we're holding in, and it's not an overt promotion here, but I think listening to the HCPs is going to be really interesting to see, how this is going to impact them, because I think, like you've just seen on that stat, some of them are not aware that this is coming down the pipe. And for me, the biggest kind of revelation was, so that means that, if you like, a doctor's website potentially is going to have a list of all the money that they've had spent on them, and a patient is going to be able to see that. They don't have much time to talk to the patient as it is, but if that conversation about their ailment goes off at a tangent in terms of, questioning what treatment they're being given, that is going to put such an immense pressure on the systems that, it feels like something's going to have to give. We've got to become sensible about this. And they are the ones that are going to have to react. They're the ones that are going to be saying, well, actually, I'm not going to go to that meeting. But actually, at the same time, my patient's now going to be more informed that I'm getting this, medical education, which I've been getting for years. They've never questioned it, perhaps. And again, it was quite revolutionary to me in terms of I've never even questioned, whether my doctor, who I've had for 15 years, has been educated themselves, because it's not in my sphere of operation. Obviously, it was to me, but, you're now going to get the lay person going in and saying, right, I know you got qualified 20 years ago, but how up to date are you? That's going to turn the whole, medical system on its head, I think. And it's going to raise some very interesting, conversations, arguments, and ultimately, decisions and change. In a way, it's quite exciting in terms of looking at what the future holds. But in another way, it's like, actually, we could be sort of standing on this, purpose that we kind of end up falling off. Has anyone got any other questions about the presentation? No? Did it make sense? Was anything new? Has anyone gone away with a little nugget, or you haven't sort of sat here for nearly an hour or 60 minutes and thought, I've wasted my time, I could have been having a cup of coffee, or even better, going to one of the stands wine receptions. Okay, so with that, I know we're a little bit ahead of time, but I'm conscious of everyone's time. If no one's got any more questions, I'm actually around through to Thursday, so if anybody does want to contact me, those are my contact details. And please, if you have a card, feel free to leave that with me, and I can send you either more information about the Healthcare Meeting Forum in December, or anything else that you'd like to just be linked in. So thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your show if you're here for longer. Thank you.